Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and Hadley is back once again.
Welcome back.
And today we are discussing Battlefield. This is a Seventh Doctor story. It is the first story of the final season of classic Doctor Who. I know that I don't think they knew it going in, but it really does kind of feel that way for a lot of it. Like, this is famously the final Doctor Who episode, which features the Brigadier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it had been some time since he appeared previous to this. I mean, you can fill me in on that, Fitz, but is it the Android Invasion was his last appearance before this one?
No, he appeared, I'm pretty sure it's Mordred Undead, which is a Fifth Doctor story.
Okay. And then, of course, there was the Five Doctors as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Brigadier's back. Bessie's back after a long absence as well.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, and this is a fun statistic, part one of this story were the lowest ratings of any full episode of Doctor Who ever until Legend of the Sea Devils.
Wow.
It's...
Oh boy.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure even that one would have been bolstered by like streaming and iViewer and all that stuff. But even putting all that stuff aside, it is a bit more of an off-the-wall Doctor Who story. It touches on stuff that we've discussed on the podcast previously with things like the Mind Robber, as an example, where it's kind of dealing with alternate dimension stuff and the line between fact and fiction. Not to the same extent, but there is a bit of it in this.
Yeah.
I am so curious, Hadley. What's your impression of this story?
Yes, I'm dying to know.
I will say this is the first Doctor Who episode to remind me of a Sonic the Hedgehog game.
What?
Sonic and the Black Knight.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a weirdly common thing that I'm seeing pop up, like not all over the place, but we just sort of throw like Arthurian legend stuff into like media that it shouldn't fit at all.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an episode of MacGyver where he travels to medieval times and he teams up with Merlin.
Okay.
That being said, though, this is fun. It wasn't like the most engaging piece of like conflict of all time, but
Sure.
I really liked the time travel. I think it was used in a clever way that I don't see a lot of Doctor Who episodes do. I think like it almost kind of reminded me of Blink with that like cyclical nature of time travel where the future leads into the past and whatnot.
Yeah, well, a lot of that does feel very Moffat, where it's like he loves to do the bootstrap kind of thing, where it's like the Doctor is encountering something that will happen in the future, that kind of thing. And the paradox element of it isn't really on display that much in this. It's just more of I guess at some point Sylvester McCoy is going to become Merlin to these extra dimensional people who resemble Arthurian legend and might be the people from Arthurian legend in our timeline and might not be. It's difficult to say.
It's implied it's not Sylvester McCoy because one of the knights is like, not your face, but your aspect, the way you carry yourself.
I mean, that's a good point as well. So I guess it's either Paul McGann or one of the new series Doctors who becomes Merlin, which, if that hasn't happened yet, that would be an interesting thing to revisit in Revival Who.
It would.
Judy Gatwa would make a fantastic Merlin.
Who would, sorry?
Judy Gatwa.
Yeah, actually, you're not wrong about that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But yeah, I am typically of the same opinion with you, Hadley. I think we're on the same page about this one for the moment, at least. This episode's I've had a lot of fun with it. I sort of got a bit lost in about episode 3 and 4 when I was like, "What's the conflict again?" Oh, right, it's a nuclear war thing. Okay, I completely forgot about that at a certain point, which is a strike against. But that is kind of weird, where you've got all this like Arthurian legend stuff and you're doing all this weird fun stuff with time travel, and you're exploring like magic and its relationship to science, and you're taking it the other direction, and then you're like, what's our main villain gonna do? She's gonna nuke shit.
Yeah, I think that element of sort of the lack of clarity of the conflict in those middle episodes, I don't think that bothered me that much, but maybe that was just because the episode in the writing and direction and also performances, they do a really good job of setting up Morgaine as quite a formidable villain. So I'm like, yeah, maybe it's not all 100% making sense, but it doesn't matter because she's a great villain and she's, striking terror into everyone she meets, and it's just kind of great for that reason.
I think I would feel that way if the Destroyer wasn't a bigger focus of the final couple of episodes, in that, because I think when they just introduced the Destroyer, I sort of then switched to, okay, so I guess this is her plan to unleash the Destroyer on humanity, but that's not what she wants because she's trying actively not to set him free.
And then, but in a way, that is a bit weird though, because if the nuke is meant to be this big thing, like, well, why does she have the Destroyer? Could she not use the Destroyer to kill everyone on Earth? I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's just a bit of lack of clarity, I guess. I mean, obviously, I think the Destroyer is a really great piece of practical makeup, especially for
it's
classic standards.
For 1989, it's very impressive.
Yeah, but I think maybe there was just an idea. It's like, oh, we've got this great, crazy prop. We've got to, put in the elements. I'm like, yeah. There's a nuke, but no, it doesn't matter. We've got scary blue dude with the devil horns. That's a real sense of terror. I will say, in terms of the that sort of cyclical element of the narrative that you pointed out, Hadley, that does make sense because this is written by Ben Aronovich, who wrote Remembrance of the Daleks. So that
we just keep coming back to that episode, don't we?
We do.
It's difficult not to, because that is one of the most iconic and well-known Seventh Doctor stories, and a lot of his era is defined by a lot of what happens in that story.
Yeah, it's like that and Curse of Fenric are probably maybe the most iconic. So it does make sense that it's using that sort of cyclical narrative again. It does also speak to something that Calvin and I have discussed before, which is what's known as the Cartmel Master Plan. And that's reflected also in the, again, weirdly and borderline uncomfortable sort of manipulative Machiavellian side of the Doctor that runs throughout a number of elements in this story. But mostly in that, a lot of this seems coordinated by the Doctor in some other story. The fact that, the Doctor leaves the note for himself in the helmet of Arthur, and, but anyway, the point is, you're right, Hadley, to point out that cyclical element, because I think it's quite prominent in this story, and also to an extent in the last couple of Sylvester McCoy seasons overall.
Yeah. I should point out, we've referenced this a couple of times. I'll clue you in a bit more, Hadley. The Cartmel Master Plan is a fan term for the last couple of seasons of Sylvester McCoy's era, which, had the show continued, would have expanded a bit further. Essentially, the main script editor and a few of the writing team at the time wanted to reintroduce a bit of mystery into the character of the Doctor, at least compared to how they were initially introduced in 1963. And it would have it brought up like hints of like what the Doctor's actual origin was, and I'm quoting that loosely. And it's kind of like it's kind of a contentious thing in the fan base, because a lot of people don't typically care for the darker tone in the later seasons, and a few people are like, just leave pre-Unearthly Child alone, and there is a bit of that in Remembrance of the Daleks as well, because I think bits of that are implied to have happened before the events of An Unearthly Child, or definitely did. I can't remember it at the moment. But yeah, that's just when we say Cartmel Master Plan or like Darker Side of the Doctor, that's largely what we're referring to there.
Yeah.
Which, in the wake of Timeless Child, a lot of it seems kind of pedestrian, but I mean, let's just, less said the better.
Yeah.
And I do know as well that Battlefield, getting back more on topic, is like I didn't really sense much of the Cartmel influence in this one. I think there were like tiny moments, but I think definitely Remembrance had it a bit more front and center for me. And
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
but in general, Ammo the Battlefield is kind of like a not it's not like terribly. I think the general impression is that most people think this story is good, but I know there is like a sliding scale of like how much of the Arthurian stuff gets in the way of people's enjoyment and how much people say leave that stuff out of Doctor Who. It's similar with a bunch of the fantasy stuff that is coming up with Shooty, or a bunch of the fictional elements from the Mind Robber, stuff like that does get in the way for people as well. And again, if that's the kind of thing that you prefer to keep out of Doctor Who, all power to you, but I do think you're sort of closing yourself off for story opportunities.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm
agree,
fine.
yeah.
I'm fine
Sorry?
with the wacky fantasy stuff.
Yeah, say that again, Hadley.
I totally agree. I think I appreciate the boldness of writing in stuff like this, especially turning the Doctor into Merlin.
Yeah.
Yeah, you like do whatever you want, see what sticks. I think especially incorporating like myth, like the Doctor is a very mythological figure. You might as well incorporate real myths as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
I mean, it's... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, also because they are still trying to like put a bit of a sci-fi spin on it as well. Like they've got a ship under the water, which is where the Lady of the Lake comes into it. Like they're loosely tying in sci-fi concepts into Arthurian stuff, and while I don't think that's necessary, and they could just do a Merlin story, like I do appreciate that it is there to still like put a needle on this is still sci-fi.
Yeah, I think there's enough of a balance, as there are in other Doctor Who stories. I can't think of any like specifically at this moment, but even apart from the Mind Robber, I think they incorporate mythological concepts and explain them with scientific means. I mean, you saw it a little bit with Horror of Fang Rock, even like it's meant to be sort of supernatural, but oh no, it's completely scientific. Sort of similar with Ghostlight, I guess. But yeah, like the point is, there's a precedent for this, and I don't think it's hugely useful to really, in a way, nitpick on Doctor Who getting too wacky, because again, like that's the nature of the show. The show's nuts, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, why would you nitpick that? Like, there's so many strange things that happen. Like, it goes back to what I said, sort of with Daleks of Manhattan, but certainly with stuff like Gridlock, it's, oh, yeah, this is an average Doctor Who story where Morgan Le Fay and some knights show up, and there's like a devil thing, and the Doctor's Merlin. That's normal, right? We expect that. That's as you say, Cuff, that's pedestrian, in comparison. But I don't think it's a really huge issue, and I'm fine with there being fantastical elements in Doctor Who. I'm actually fine with them taking that pretty far, as long as they can ground it in a basic element of scientific sort of explanation, I suppose. One thing I will mention with, I think you sort of touched on it before, Hadley, the sort the mythologizing of the Doctor. I want to bring that up because that's something that I've complained about in the past, certainly in Moffat's era. Now, I think when it does happen in the Moffat era, the reason why it bothers me personally is because it is sort of steeped in a sense of sentimentality and romanticism, even that annoys me. That's a whole other topic which we don't have time for. But it must be said that it's not like the mythologizing of the Doctor is anything new, because apart from the fact that I am sure there are other examples in the classic era, we're reviewing a story where the Doctor is literally Merlin. I mean, what are we really talking about there?
Yeah, no,
I think making them like interdimensional beings probably was like a bit too much. Like, I would honestly probably accept it more if they just said, no, Arthurian legend's just totally a thing in history that we kind of forgot about.
I do think that was kind of like maybe like a thing they threw in at the last minute, just in case, like maybe the script editor went, I think people are going to kick up a fuss if you imply that King Arthur was real, and then they just went, fine, we'll make them from another dimension. That way, we had that little the extra layer of protection.
Well,
Well, it's just interesting that in the future, Robin Hood is going to be a totally real historical figure. So it's
Yeah, I was reminded of that episode of The Simpsons where everyone thinks Homer's crazy and like Hibbert's going through a list of fictional and real characters, and it's like Robin Hood, real. Oh, I'm sorry, Homer. Due to recent historical evidence, it's been determined that Robin Hood is actually fictional, and then gives him an electric shock.
Oh, dear. But in a way, like making Morgaine and the characters coming from a different dimension, maybe that sort of helps with the sci-fi element, because if they were from our dimension, it's kind of just implied that they would just be magical, but that goes against what Doctor Who is. Again, it's
I think it's
fiction.
the magic element you have to explain. You
Yeah.
could reason it away by saying, well, they're aliens and they have like a different. It's like, you know, the way the Doctor says that where any advanced form of magic is indistinguishable from science.
Yeah.
I hated that line.
You did?
Yeah, it was a little dumb. Didn't really make sense to me.
Sure, yeah. I think it is meant to be one of those things where it's like the Doctor understands it, but we don't, and I think that's part of the charm of the line for me. But I understand why it would get under your skin.
Well, I mean, the whole thing is similar to the Demons, where you know, there are these spooky supernatural things happening, but the Doctor clearly says no, it's just another form of science that humanity isn't used to. It may have been more helpful if the Doctor was clearer about that with the story, just saying, oh, they're from a different dimension, therefore the rules of physics in that dimension are different to what they are here. But there's enough context so it just works. It doesn't, certainly doesn't ruin the story, I don't think.
Totally. So just getting back to the general opinion of the episode, with out of 176 votes, this story has an average rating of 7.4.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty fair.
It might be a bit lower. Like, again, it's fun. There's just not much more compelling me with this one.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree. They're I think, and incidentally, this is the 6th highest rated 7th Doctor story.
Yeah, what's it between?
It's between Survival and the Happiness Patrol.
Yeah, I can understand that, I think.
Yeah. I do agree. Like, this episode is kind of like that classic thing of like, it's a lot of fun. They're trying to say something about nuclear war, but it's like that's an incredibly weak aspect of the episode, and it's not really a huge focus. So when when the Doctor talks Morgaine out of firing a nuke, it doesn't quite land as well as it does. Like it's no the Zygon inversion speech. Let's put it that way.
I mean, it's a nuke, so I certainly hope it wouldn't land. Anyway,
sure.
Yeah, no, I think, I don't know, I think those elements of, you know, honor and, you know, the futility of war, I think they work slightly better than you're giving them credit for. I think the Brigadier kind of helps with that a little bit. Certainly, those moments in isolation, I think, are pretty compelling, and there are other small moments that are surprisingly emotional, but it's certainly not, I think, the most thematically ambitious story. And I'm not just saying that just because we, you know, recently reviewed Daleks in Manhattan. I think, yeah, like it a lot of it is that sort of basic Doctor Who fun sci-fi romp, and it does that pretty well. But apart from the fact that there may be flaws that we haven't even discussed yet, it's certainly not the most ambitious. It's not even the most ambitious in terms of Seventh Doctor stories. Remembrance is more ambitious. I think Curse of Fenric probably is too. So, yeah.
For all its faults, Ghostlight is significantly more ambitious than this as well.
It is actually. When you think about it, yeah, that's fair.
7.4 for plot.
I mean, yeah, I was never really bored, I guess, and there was nothing Maybe there's stuff that you two will point out that I haven't thought of yet, but there was nothing super, uncohesive about the narrative. Maybe some of it was certainly stronger than others, but there's nothing that really bothered me on any massive level. Apart from the fact...
No, go on.
I've forgotten her name. The blind woman who's played by the actress who plays Berger in Earthshock. Her character arc doesn't really seem to go anywhere. From memory, unless I'm, misremembering it. But that was a bit odd.
I don't know if you can really describe it as a character arc. It's just that it's more Gain makes her be able to see, and then they leave the story after that.
Yeah, that was bizarre. Anyway, yeah.
8.1. What was that, Hadley?
Sorry, that was
I
me.
have said nothing.
Okay, I thought you said something, but it was clearly Fitz that said that.
Yeah.
8.1 for acting. Sure.
Yeah, that one's bad.
I'll say this, right? There are some moments where there's no one's bad, but I'm surprised at how not great some of the performances feel. There's small moments, but they just stick out to me. Particularly with the Doctor, especially when he's in conflict with some of the villains, he gets quite sort of surprisingly melodramatic.
Yeah,
and
I noticed that as well.
And in a way that doesn't feel too convincing. I think you pointed out a similar moment in Ghostlight, right?
Yeah, it's something that Sylvester does a couple of times now, where he just suddenly goes very, very big for not much reason.
Well, the problem is, you could argue that maybe that's just him sort of stumbling through this sort of Merlin persona, and he's trying to inject some nuances there by having the Doctor sort of, again, stumble through it. But there's not enough progression in that sort of performance to justify it, so it does just come across as a bit awkward. And even in stories like Remembrance, where he does get quite melodramatic, particularly when he's confronting Davros, it still feels more authentic than it does here, and it's certainly...
when he's confronting Davros, he's got a reason to get that big.
Yeah, for sure.
Not only is he confronting one of his biggest nemesis, but he's also, he takes some time to, mimic the tone of the Dalek, and,
yeah, sort of and Davros himself.
Yeah, and sort of mock them in that way.
Yeah.
Here, I forget when he says it, but he just suddenly, yells something out. I think he's on his own even, and then just runs off, and that's the end of the scene. It was just kind of out of place, and I went, okay, that's a bit weird.
It's just a bit strange, I guess. And certainly, a lot of these moments really don't compare to that wonderful scene in the Happiness Patrol, where he sort of, psychologically disarms this guy who's got a gun pointed at him. There's none of that nuance. Which is kind of unfortunate. There's also one scene where something's happening with the Doctor, and Ace just says to him, "Doctor, are you okay?" And her, Sophie Aldred's performance in that one moment seemed really sort of flat to me, which is strange because Sophie Aldred normally gives a fantastic performance as Ace, so that just sort of stuck out to me. Now, whether that's got to do with a combination of the direction of the actors, the acting itself, and the editing, I don't know. But though the performances in this story are pretty good, I'm surprised how weak they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brigadier's great as usual.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the most part, the main characters are solid and really strong. The Brigadier feels like he hasn't missed a beat since his last appearance.
Yeah.
I will give my hot take. I don't care for Sylvester McCoy's performance.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Do you care to elaborate?
He reminded me a lot of Rowan Atkinson for some reason, and I just found his delivery to be a bit odd.
You know what? I can kind of understand that. I think even as a kid, I think I mistook him for Rowan Atkinson at some point because they
are very similar.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a goofiness, I guess. There are a lot of moments, I think, even in the story where he's allowed to sort of simmer down and he becomes quite menacing, but that element you see more in other stories. Again, I'm surprised, given how good I think his performance is generally, I'm surprised how goofy he gets in this story. I don't think there's only better Sylvester McCoy performances, I think.
Yeah.
He also does this weird thing with his umbrella cane where he's not really using it like a cane. He just kind of swings it around.
I love that. That's just a quirk with him. I mean, maybe like because I've watched a number of Sylvester McCoy stories since I was a kid, but I love that quirk. It's just kind of great.
Well, it also comes in handy on a couple of occasions where he snags someone's arm as he's trying to like stop them from throwing a punch or swing a sword. Like it comes in handy in those situations. But I think if he was like just going for a leisurely stroll, he probably would use it as a cane more often than not. But other than that, it's just another affectation, like the Fifth Doctor with his stick of celery, or how and you're gonna hate me saying this, but the 11th Doctor in his bow tie, how the 12th Doctor wore sunglasses for a season. It's just like one of those Doctor quirks that they're allowed to have.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's
He's
like
also got to have question marks all over his clothes.
That's been a consistent thing since the Fifth Doctor. I think it's more pronounced here because they're literally all over his vest as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I think I heard once years ago. It might have been even with an interview with I think his name's Andrew Cartmel, but he said that someone said that they wanted to enhance the mysterious quality about the Doctor. Admittedly, not the most subtle thing to have question marks all over his outfit and to have the umbrella be a question mark, but the thing is, I could actually forgive the question mark on the umbrella if they just changed the vest, but when you put it all together, it is a little bit odd.
I mean, if they, I would love to see the question marks make a recurrence if they're not as in your face as with McCoy. I think like the question marks on Peter Davison's like shirt collar, that's like a really nice thing, I think.
Yeah.
His costume also reminds me of Elton John from the "I'm Still Standing" music video.
I haven't seen it.
That's a really great comparison. 7.4 for effects. I think for the most part, they tend to, like, the Destroyer looks really great. There are a few visual effects shots that are clearly of their time.
Yeah, but they work well enough. I mean, certainly. I mean, maybe it's just because we're comparing it to other practical effects in Doctor Who, including one from that particular story, which Cuff maybe promised not to bring up again. But I think they work pretty well. Like the weird serpent thing, yeah, you can clearly tell it's pretty cartoonish, but it works well enough in the context of the story. And at the very least, as I've said, God, we've seen so much worse than that. And the Destroyer is always good fun, and I like the costumes of them.
But like, but the other thing is that aside from the Destroyer, nothing really impressed me that much either. Because I think there are a few instances of Classic Who where they'll do something and we'll go, "Wow, that's actually genuinely a fantastic effect." Like Fifth Doctor Dalek story when they're burning down the door. It's beautiful effect. I think there was even something recently that we watched and we were like, "That's actually outstanding." And maybe it was the Visitation, maybe it was the Demons. I can't remember which one.
I think it may have been actually the Mind Robber. There was no, maybe that was me just pointing out what the Medusa looked like. But anyway, yeah, no, your point still stands. There's nothing like, given how ambitious Doctor Who historically could be, especially in ratio to the budget and time constraints that they had. Yeah, this isn't the most, wow, I can't believe they were able to do this, and this sort of story. So yeah, that's fair.
7.8 for replay.
Maybe a little lower, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
It got.
I think the charm wears off after a rewatch, I'd imagine.
That's probably a huge factor. I'd agree.
It didn't get like hugely worse for me, and even after sort of the Arthurian legend, Doctor's Merlin thing, even when that wears off, there's still enough to really enjoy. I love Morgaine; she's a great villain, and the Brigadier, given how much of a sort of a cheap addition he could have been, I think he's pretty compelling. But yes, I think generally speaking, it doesn't hold up amazingly on repeated viewings.
7 out of 90 people say this requires a previous story. I do think you need the Brigadier, at least a passing knowledge of him, so that his appearance in this has the impact that it's trying to get across.
Yeah.
Hooray for 5 Doctors.
Yeah, I was going to say, well done, Hadley. You watched the perfect Brigadier story to introduce you before this one. But otherwise, I don't think this should be your first story. Even putting aside the whole, it doesn't do a lot to introduce stuff. Like, what would your impression of the show be if this is all you saw? Just
It's pretty wild and
Full
weird.
fantasy show. They must like touch on like myths and legends every episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and again, that happens more than I think people may like to acknowledge. But yes, it's not the staple of the show, so it would be a little bit weird.
And finally, I'll quickly run through the synopsis. The TARDIS materializes in the English countryside near the village of Carberry, where a nuclear missile convoy under the command of Unit's Brigadier Winifred Bamborough has run into difficulties. Lying on the bed of the nearby Lake Vortigern is a spaceship from another dimension containing the body of King Arthur, supposedly held in suspended animation, and his sword Excalibur. Anselin, a knight from the other dimension, arrives on Earth to aid the king, but is followed by his rival Mordred and the latter's mother, a powerful sorceress named Morgaine. They all recognize the Doctor as Merlin, a fact that the Time Lord attributes to events in his own future. A battle breaks out between Unit and Morgaine's men. Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart has come out of retirement to assist in the crisis and ends up using silver bullets to kill the Destroyer, an awesomely powerful creature unshackled by Morgaine to devour the world, although he himself is almost killed in the process. Morgaine tries to fire the nuclear missile, but is overcome by shock when the Doctor tells her that Arthur is in fact dead. She and her son are then taken prisoner by Unit.
Yeah.
I would say hearing your summary just made me realize the name Morgaine, More space Gain. It's really stupid.
I suppose we'll. I'm curious to ask this question. We've already heard your general opinions on the Seventh Doctor based on this story. What's your opinion of Ace based on just this story?
He kept complaining about how she's like, I'm not going to be just the next one. It's like, honey, you are. I'm sorry.
Anything else?
It's like a teen. It's like a, I don't know, stereotypical teenage girl, I guess. Like, she's talking with the gals and they're bickering, and like Morgaine tries to use their cattiness against them to break from the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot going on with her.
Yeah, I agree. It's like she gets to utilize her explosives for moments, and that's fun that she gets to actually do something with that, because most of the time it's just the Doctor telling her, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
And it's actually a really fun sequence where she gets the timer a bit wrong and they have to like jump out of the way.
Which is not the first time that's happened.
No. Yeah, but I agree that there's not an awful lot for Ace to do. I'm surprised that you mentioned that scene where they're in the circle and didn't mention by far the most shocking thing about it.
And what would that be?
The fact that Ace calls an Asian character yellow.
Oh fuck! I missed that.
What?
So it's right at the end of the bickering that they're having, and they're clearly both being influenced by Morgaine. But right before she almost falls out of the circle, and they realize what's going on and hug each other. Ace says, "Shut up, you yellow slant-eyed," and then is interrupted by almost falling. And I heard that. And I was like, Jesus Christ!
What?
Yeah.
Oh god, that's
How did you miss that of all people, Fitz?
I don't know.
What do you mean, you people?
He's seen it multiple times. He's the only one of us that has.
Oh, so only Asians can rewatch Doctor Who multiple times?
Jeez, shut up.
Yeah, I don't know how the fuck I missed that. Wow. That's I mean,
and they're clearly
there are more explicit elements of racism in Doctor Who before this, but that's a whole other story. It's still not very good.
And they're clearly doing that on purpose. Like, it's clearly there for the shock value, but even still, don't do it.
There are is that really? Did they have to do that? That's not great.
It's not.
Let's be clear about that.
Yes.
That's yeah. I'm not quite sure how else to respond to that other than
amazing that if I hadn't noticed that, we would have just breezed through the episode, not bringing it up, and might have had to address it in the like if someone brought it up in the comments, and all of us at the same time going, "Hang on, what? What?"
Ugh.
Because I even rewound the footage because I was like, no, she didn't say that.
Yeah, that's not great. In fact, what you could say is
she was
that's
under the power of Morgaine, Morgaine
Yeah.
made her a racist. She had Ambien. That's why she made those
oh
tweets.
god.
It was late night and I was on Twitter.
Yeah, that's pretty shitty. Actually, that is not good.
You could argue the conversation was already getting to like they were already at each other's throats and getting personal.
But did
And,
it
like,
have
She was
to?
just one step away from calling Ace a cracker. We just missed it.
Well, yeah, totally. And like, my point is like the episode it doesn't need to go to that point. Like,
No.
they're already there, and again, like, it's the late '80s. They're clearly trying to like be a bit shocking and show, whoa, hang on, but like that's like of all the things, one of the many things. Actually, no, one of the few things that we've seen in Classic Who so far that has like demonstrably not aged well. Like absolutely definitively, like special effects aside, you can argue that they hold up for the time.
Yeah.
This, nah.
Honestly, it's a pretty egregious example. Again, there are other examples that I think are worse.
There are.
Talons of Wang Shiang. Anyway, but it's just kind of icky, to put it one way. So
Have you seen Captain Jack's transphobic speech in Torchwood?
Yep, that's not great either.
I feel like I've seen that, but I just can't remember. Does it happen early on in the series?
It happens in Torchwood at some point, and I can't remember the context. But he's just talking about like, I need to look it up properly because I don't remember what it was.
That's okay. I can give you the gist, and it would be nicer if the trans person said it.
I agree. Go for
That
it.
is, yep, that's very true.
Yeah, he's just like coming in. He's like giving the big confrontation of the battle. He's like, I have trust issues. I had a friend named Bruce, and I thought I knew everything I knew about him. He seemed like a trustworthy guy. Then one day he starts insisting on being called Betty, and that's why I have trust issues.
Yeah, and that is particularly difficult to hear from Jack, of all people.
Yeah.
Who has previously been described as a 51st century guy, just a bit more flexible when it comes to dancing. And like this like progressive character looping to that low. Not great. I'm trying to figure out who wrote the episode and if it's the one.
Sure.
Sorry?
That's Chibnall.
Is it Chibnall?
I have no idea.
Well, Chibnall is the showrunner of Torchwood, but so like no matter what, he has final say on that. But I don't think he directly wrote that story. I think that was Toby Whithouse.
Right.
But either way, like
not good.
Not good. Now that we've discussed it, let's move on to other things.
Sure.
The Brigadier. Now you mentioned that I think you Fitz mentioned that there was the potential for him to sort of glide through the story.
Yeah, or that he just could have been used as member guys.
Yeah, and I think there are shades of that. Like I think for the most part, and especially early on, there's not a lot for him to do. Like he's basically just stuck in a helicopter until like he doesn't interact with the Doctor at all until the start of episode 3.
Yeah.
But I do think that when he is used, he's used well. I particularly enjoy how there's this long section at the start where he's like, I'm retired now. I'm not about that soldier life anymore. I don't care if it's the king. I don't care if it's like the head of unit. And then he hears the Doctor's name and he's like, all right, I'm putting on the uniform again. Like without hesitation. I do find it a bit confusing as to why prior to that moment, his wife Doris is like impressing on him. But it's this person. You're not even coming out of retirement for this. And then as soon as he puts on the uniform again, she's like, but why are you doing this? They don't need you. She sort of flip-flops pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's a bit odd.
Women. You just don't know what they want.
That's why I've got trust issues, Hadley. But I think for the most part, when he is used in the story, he's used well. I especially enjoy how he sort of like he has that like moment towards the end where he recognizes that the Doctor's going to have difficulty with the Destroyer, or at least like pulling the trigger. So he takes the matter into his own hands. And I think that is a very Brigadier thing to do, from what I've heard about.
And it's good because I'm pretty sure the scene where the Doctor nearly kills Mordred, but then he hesitates, and then the Brigadier says, try me. I'm pretty sure that happened before that other moment. So that really works for characterization. And I actually really like that scene because I think it actually helps with the Brigadier's characterization overall, because it shows that, he's still the Brigadier, right? He's a bit of a gruff, military man, and he believes in, sort of a sense of military honor, and he's got a strong sense of duty. But it's combined in this story with a more of a focus on pathos, I suppose. The fact that, he knocks the Doctor out and sort of almost, he sort of attempts to sacrifice himself. And yes, that's part of his sort of militaristic mind, but there's also, I think, that real love between him and the Doctor that comes through. And I think that's important because that progression of the Brigadier, understanding who his friends are and how important they are to him, you can see elements of that even in Third Doctor stories. I'm pretty sure it sort of comes to a head in the Green Death. It'll be interesting to look at that story itself. But certainly that combination of the friendship, but also the military duty, I don't think the Brigadier would have been able to sort of achieve the combination as easily in early Third Doctor stories, for example, as he does here. Yeah. So it's just, and maybe, again, I'm a bit biased here because I've watched more of the classic series, but it's just really nice seeing that sort of characterization sort of come full circle.
I do find it interesting that during that Mordred encounter, Morgaine sees that the Brigadier and says, "Careful, this man is bathed in blood," or something like that. And yet the Seventh Doctor is right there, and we established last week on the podcast, this is the Doctor with the highest kill count.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe because, maybe Morgaine can't read the Doctor's mind, who knows?
Sure.
I mean, the Brigadier is steeped in blood. For a number of reasons, but that's
definitely
a fair discrepancy to point out.
Hadley, how was this episode regarding the Brigadier for you? Like, you've had limited experience with him prior to this. What were your impressions of him in the story?
Like a nice dude. He had a good send off where he's like, now it's time to finally retire, and he actually did.
Yeah.
Apart from that, I don't know. I don't know much about his character, so probably having the context of all those Second Doctor episodes would have helped me. Like, oh yeah, that's totally how he is, like in those series.
Yeah, I think again, the story arc with him works well enough. I mean, certainly in that last episode, but a lot of my enjoyment, as I say, is coming from that context. Also, I will point this out. In terms of his place in the narrative, would you say he only really exists to get that last moment with this quite literally the silver bullet moment? Because even when he's interacting with the other characters, I don't know how sort of strongly he acts in the narrative.
I agree. I think that it is a criticism that other people have had about this story, where they do kind of feel like the Brigadier is only just there to be the Brigadier again. And if that's all you want out of him, then that's fine. And I think that those, there are a lot more, like, aimless examples of returning characters in Doctor Who.
Oh, yeah. God, yeah.
And I do think there is, like, I mean, the Brigadier is sort of a special case because he's not really a companion. He's this sort of, like, recurring figure that pops up in the Doctor's adventures whenever they're on Earth in the 60s or 70s or 80s or whatever. Yeah. I think there is a bit more license to use the Brigadier when he's otherwise not a major focus of a season's narrative or arc or whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's not like, say, bringing Ace and Tegan back in Power of the Doctor and having them do basically nothing the entire time they're there. Or bringing Jack back for Revolution of the Daleks, I think, and have him do nothing as well.
Yeah.
like there's far worse examples.
Yeah, for sure. But as we say, you wonder how cohesively he's fitting in the narrative. I mean, he's got great moments. He's got the bit where he kind of, he points the gun at Mordred so the Doctor doesn't have to kill him, and then that sort of comes full circle in the end. But beyond that, he doesn't seem to have a massive role, and I
Really?
think maybe it speaks to the fact that when you, especially in a more standard narrative like a Doctor Who story is, standard by which I mean, it's plot point A, B, and C, and the characters have goals and whatnot. In that sort of narrative, you need a character to be interesting, obviously, and they need to be part of the plot, but you need to marry those two things together, and it's just not quite coming together in this story. Worse examples, but yeah.
It's interesting seeing her bump heads with Ace, or at least Ace not like be too fond of him initially, because I don't think that is a dynamic that a lot of other companions had with the Brigadier. I think it was always more of a this is the highest ranking soldier guy. Okay, I'm going to respect him. Oh wait, he's friends with the Doctor. Okay, I'll be friends with him too. I don't think there was ever really a hostile dynamic between the Brigadier and a companion.
It does make sense, though, because I think, certainly for a classic series companion, if there's going to be a conflict between them, it's going to be between Ace and the Brigadier, because Ace is very much a rebel, a free spirit, there's kind of like a punky anarchist vibe to her, I suppose. So that conflict does make sense. And in a way, maybe that's a sign of the fact the Doctor had changed a bit. I mean, we talked about in the Daemons, where the Doctor has that really weird comment where he says to Joe, he's your superior, so you can at least show him some respect. This story shows that, that whole respect of authority, maybe not the best thing in the world, especially from, respect for the military, but, yeah, I don't know.
Well, we've been saying the Brigadier this entire time, but there's a second Brigadier in this story.
I was going to say, we talked about the Brigadier, let's talk about the Brigadier.
Yeah. As soon as I saw her, I went, it's amazing that the show did this in 1989. If the two tried this now, the people would be up in arms, saying, how dare they replace the Brigadier with a minority? This is clearly just woke box ticking. I won't stand for this. The show never used to do this. Well, I think you'll find. And it's a shame it's a shame having me just said that I now have to say I didn't really care for her character that much.
I liked her. I thought she was fun.
I just think it's interesting that this is the point where the Brigadier is retired. The Alistair, that is, Lethbridge Stewart. And he's already had all of these adventures with the Doctor, which are, or must rather, be on unit record. They must be.
Yeah.
So when the new Brigadier hears about this Doctor character who has been involved in Unit in the past, rather than doing the research and going, okay, who is this guy? She just immediately defaults to, well, he must be up to no good. And I don't think that it's a very sound tactical decision for someone like the Brigadier to have made. So that's my main thing, especially when she rocks up at the end of episode 1 and is like, I'm arresting you. It's like, well, what have they done? They haven't done anything to warrant arresting. You're just like making bizarre assumptions that, again, don't have that much of a strategic or military mindset involved.
Do you mean when they arrest Ace and the Doctor, or
that's part of the cliffhanger in episode 1 before the Mordred's army appeared, when the second Brigadier arrives and says, all right, you're all coming with me, or something like that. And I was like, come on, dude, put the research, comb through the unit archives and actually figure out who the Doctor is before you do anything, because this is just pathetic. And
I mean, I guess I think it does make a certain amount of sense, the fact that they are apparently civilians on a military site that's obviously going to be a bit of a cause for alarm, and it does speak to the fact that, in a way, much like Lethbridge Stewart, Brigadier Bambera sort of is sticking to that military sense of duty, I suppose, and playing things by the book.
the difference is, though, like, if you say apparently civilians, right? And again, by this point, there have been decades of history between the Doctor and UNIT that, again, would be easily on record and easily accessible, especially if you've already got someone there telling you, oh, if they're calling themselves the Doctor, we used to work with someone called this guy used to be on the payroll. And in fact, we found out recently, because of the novelizations of the 60th anniversary specials, he still was.
Yeah. Okay, that would make sense. Yeah, because that conversation with the other soldier saying, "Oh yeah, there was this guy called the Doctor who was part of UNIT," that happened before Brigadier Bambera burst in and
Yes.
tried to arrest him. But yeah, okay, no, that makes a bit more sense. That's pretty fair. What did you think of her, Hadley?
Yeah, I agree with you. Like she's she's clearly kind of there just to be conflicts, and it's not really justified very well. It's an interesting because like I was thinking the exact same thing. It's like, oh, they replaced the Brigadier with a black woman. It reminded me of like a lot of the conflicts people had when they announced the new 007 was a black woman, and it's like, no, she's idiots. She's not James Bond. In the narrative of the movie, she's the new 007. They're not replacing Daniel Craig.
Yeah.
Chill.
Yeah.
I also I wasn't a huge fan of how, like, after Alistair Lethbridge Stewart shows up, her only real involvement in the story is to tease a romance between her and the knight. Like the couple of moments, they
that
ask each other
was.
if they're married. I'm like, oh really? You're gonna do this now? You're gonna introduce a female brigadier and have her immediately default to love interest after the
Yeah.
previous brigadier shows up? Come on, Doctor Who.
It's almost something. Yeah, it's almost something I'd expect from like a Disney cartoon from the 80s. It's very. Not only is it dumb, but it's. Yeah, I guess there's kind of a sexist element to it, and it's just a shame that that Doctor Who resorted to that. Yeah, that kind of sucks. I mean, it's like it's not the most prominent part of her characterization.
No.
It could be more prominent, but the fact that it's even in there at all, you just sit there wondering, did it have to be there? Are we really doing this? And also, not the fact it doesn't even really lead to anything. So what is it?
No.
There's not really much of a point of it in any way. So yeah, it's just kind of annoying. I think purely in terms of the way she interacts with other characters, I really enjoy it. But again, when you look at the way she fits into the overall narrative, there's I can understand why you'd have problems. Like, her personality is interesting, but the way she's being incorporated could be certainly better.
She has her moments. I enjoy at the start of episode 2 when she essentially just fist fights an Arthurian knight and wins in the background while the Doctor.
That was. I like kind of the commentary about people in the military that the Doctor has there, but yes, it was a bit odd. I mean, well, it's funny. I talk about 80s cartoons, but that feels like something you'd see in an 80s cartoon.
I can see the dust cloud around them and like
that's so
little fists popping out occasionally.
I'm surprised how not silly that scene was, actually, because
no, I agree.
That seems really ridiculous. Like, even if you were to describe that scene to somebody, like, what are they supposed to think? Anyway, I want to go back to Ace for a minute.
Sure.
We say that it's not a great Ace episode. You're right. And as a point of comparison, I want to just sort of go back to the Happiness Patrol. Now, you and I, Cuff, we had a number of issues with that story, but I think I even pointed out it was a fairly strong showing for Ace. Like, her character progression was really interesting, the way that she interacts with the world, especially, and how she's sort of fighting against this really awful, stiff upper lip, crazy society that the Doctor and Ace have found themselves stuck in. The rebellious streak shows up in it, but it feels much more justified, and there's a real strength and a pathos. But here, apart from the fact, apart from that argument that she has with Xiao Yung, it's it's not an amazing characterization. I mean, she's doing some of the sort of the average surface level stuff you'd expect with Ace. You know, she's blowing up shit with a nitro, and she's, you know, given sass. And there are some moments of that where it feels quite good, but beyond that, there isn't a lot of depth there, which is especially, I think, surprising, because the general impression that I get is that Ace is quite a deep character, especially in the last couple of Sylvester McCoy seasons. So yeah, not bad, not a terrible turn for Ace, I guess, but generally speaking, certainly not the best.
Yeah. Let's discuss the villains, I guess. I guess that's all we left to do.
I think so, actually.
I do like that they are, like, even though their dialogue and their demeanor are clearly, like, very, very clearly Arthurian, but they also, like, they've got their own, like, they're not just there to be stand-ins for, like, Mordred and Morgaine and all those, like, regular. They do have, like, there is a little spin that Doctor Who puts on them. I have no idea how entrenched in honor the Morgaine of legend was meant to be. But I like that's clearly a part of her, and like there is a certain element of that, like how she, like they have that sequence where they take some time out to commemorate the victims of World War One or Two, or whichever military soldiers are buried in that cemetery.
Yeah, there's some nuance there for sure.
Yeah, and even like giving the lady her sight back, like we talked about how that didn't serve much purpose for her, but like for Morgaine, that's clearly a moment of, oh, you've clearly been dealt a bad hand. Let me fix that and honor you, give you a sight back. Like it's a really small thing, and at the time I was like, why'd you do that? And now I'm like, oh, it's because she's got some code that she's adhering to here. It's nice, and it makes it even more telling when she then turns around and goes, I'm going to give a stranger her sight back, and I'm also going to abandon my son to death.
Yeah, she's a pretty interesting character, and for me, one of the more enjoyable parts of the story. I think that's partly due to the performance, because I've forgotten her name, Jean someone. Actually, you know what? I think I've got this page up here now. I should be able to figure out who this is. It is Jean Marsh. She's clearly having a lot of fun with the role, but also there's quite a bit of nuance in it, because I think it would be very easy to overplay that role, to make it really over the top, very almost Wicked Witch of the West. But there's nuances there. There's the tragedy. There's, you know, the kind of sinister, manipulative side of her, the fact that she, you know, abandons her son to die, and then she's kind of forced to confront that. And then, of course, there's the ending where she realizes, yeah, like, is this honor? You know, millions of people obliterated. Is that, you know, what I'm really fighting for? There's a surprising amount there. And I think even if she's not fitting into the narrative, maybe as well as she could be as a character, she's very entertaining.
I still wish that the final speech was a bit better than it was, or at least more set up. Because like I can't help but compare it to the Zygon inversion, because again, both conflicts end with someone being talked out of pressing a button to start a war.
Yeah.
So I can't help but compare them.
Yeah, that's
and,
fair.
I think both stories are actually a similar length, right? Because this is a four-parter where all episodes are like 25 minutes. And the other one is a two-parter with both episodes like 45 minutes. So
so 100 to 90 minutes. So yeah, essentially.
It translates to a similar length. In Zygon inversion, the speech lasts for like close to 10 minutes and is like way more detailed and varied, and I'm going to say nuanced as well, but it's also a personal speech, and it directs to the cat, and it's like built up over the course of the entire 100 minutes of the story, and it's so effective. This one, because the nuclear Armageddon factor isn't even that pronounced, and the speech lasts like 60 seconds at that, if that, I really think that it is a little much for like a sudden character change of heart for someone like Morgaine, who we saw like I think she does have an evil laugh at some point, and that character isn't one. A character that doesn't even laugh isn't one I associate with. They'll be reasonable.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think there's enough nuance for me to still find it pretty compelling, but those are pretty fair points. What did you think of Morgaine, Hadley?
One more the comparisons they wanted to make with like clearly they wanted to do like anti-war themes,
Mm.
and the comparison between like medieval warfare and the looming threat of nuclear devastation is just very missed. Like
Yeah, I
the
agree.
point
Yeah.
the point of like nuclear, the threat of like just being nuked to complete like
Oblivion.
extinction. There was nothing like it. It was completely
Yeah.
new. This idea of just like radiation and just nothing gone. Like no, there's no cannon. There's no trebuchet that's gonna wipe out the planet.
It's
Yeah, I
literally
agree.
hell descending from the sky. That's completely fair. Um,
And
I mean,
I think that is another part of why I don't think these themes are that well integrated with each other. Because again,
sure.
like if the episode had been like purely a commentary on warfare in all forms, that they might have been able to find a way to do it. But because the final encounter is literally just nuclear warfare, isn't the way. There's no honor in that.
Yeah,
It
it's.
doesn't really work.
I mean, in a way, maybe it sort of ties into sort of some of the Doctor's, I guess, manipulativeness. Maybe he's just deliberately putting up a farce to use Morgaine's sense of honor against her. But the problem is, it's built up to be such a big thing that you feel like the Doctor's being almost sincere there. So it almost
Oh,
feels
no,
like,
absolutely. I don't think
yeah,
anything he's saying there is something he doesn't genuinely believe.
yeah. So it's almost like he's saying, "Oh well." I don't know, like, is he saying, "Oh, some war is good, but others aren't"? I mean, it's not a very, as you say, it doesn't really fit together very well, does it?
Yeah, it's for me like his speech to Morgaine comes across more like this isn't the way. Don't nuke people. Fight them one on one with swords instead.
Yeah, yeah. And that's quite strange in a way because, um, there's the story. I think it's Planet of the Daleks. Right near the end, there's this one character who he's very kind of war obsessed and he wants to, be, I think, part of the battle. And the Doctor specifically takes the pacifist route and says, when you get home, talk about honor the friends you've lost, but, don't go and tell them that, war is some exciting and thrilling game. So it is a little weird that that's not really, you know, addressed that much in the end. I mean, it's not like the Doctor's making a big pro-war statement, but it is just weird that it's not investigated thoroughly enough. Um, so honestly, no, that's a pretty good point. It's not great, it must be said.
I think just using the Doctor as like a vehicle for being against whatever the villain is against can have you trapped into some pitfalls like this one.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, that's fair. Um,
but like I said, I don't think it's like a full miss with this character. I do think that she has interesting things about her, but I don't think that the final conflict is that interesting.
yeah, that's fair. Honestly, again, like the way she interacts with the characters, that's really fun. And again, the Jane Marsh, she's clearly having a ball playing
Yeah,
this character, but is that enough?
well, I can kind of extend the same thing to Mordred because his actor is clearly having a good time as well.
Yeah, yeah,
But like he's clearly just there to be oh, we need a bit of conflict here. Let's have Mordred fight the other knight for a bit.
yeah.
Because I think the clearest indication of that is like when he confronts his mother, being like, "You left me for dead," and then the next time we see either of them, they're A, separate from each other, but B, they don't bring it up.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that is a little bit odd. Also, love that bit where the Doctor just goes strolling through, the
Yes.
conflict between Anselin and Mordred. It's one of those things where that could have come across as really bad and unconvincing, but the way it's sort of written and acted and even directed, I guess, it just works, and that's kind of great. Um, I don't know if I'd say that sort of thing is unique to Doctor Who, but it sort of makes sense that they're taking that kind of risk with such a comedic moment. It's really kind of great.
Well, you don't get many sword fights in Doctor Who, so you
That's
might as
true,
well
yeah.
like have the fun bit
Mm.
of the Doctor running in between two these swords.
Yeah, you get a couple of sword fights here and there, but they're not that common
No.
for a number of reasons. I want to talk about the Doctor a little bit more for a minute, because, as I said, the sort of manipulative element, I think that is coming across here in certain moments. The fact that, he's orchestrated this thing, even if he doesn't know it, that some version of the Doctor in the future is going to sort this out. That's part of it. But there's one particular moment that really did stick out to me, and it's the scene where he's essentially using the same kind of, Time Lord mind tricks on the villagers that the
Yeah, he
Master
does
would
the
normally
yeah, he
use.
does the Master's telepathic trick.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it doesn't ruin the character for me. It certainly doesn't. I don't think it's as sinister as what the Master does, because we know the Master. It's always for nefarious reasons. But just on principle, you'd think that just seems something that the Doctor would never do. So
I agree. It's like that kind of thing where it's like, sure, you could argue that he's trying to keep them safe, but also like
there
it's
are other ways to do it.
yes, and I think it's a line that despite the Time Lords having firmly established this ability, it's telling that it isn't one the Doctor uses very,
Yep.
very often, because like he clearly is like, this is an invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
I had never heard of it until this episode to prove that point.
Sure, yeah. It's a trick that the Master, who mainly interacted with the Third Doctor, pulled out quite a lot. He tended to be very mesmeric and would influence people in far more sinister ways.
Yeah.
Most recently, when we reviewed the demons, or the daemons, or whatever, he had basically mind controlled an entire small town to become
Yeah.
his sort of followers and cult kind of thing.
Yep. So it is weird that they've got the Doctor
Yeah.
doing that.
And it's an
Because
aspect of the Master that they toned down for the revival. I mean, John Sims' Master has an element of it with the Archangel Network, but we don't really see Missy or Sacha Dhawan as the Master go to that well very often.
yeah, which is fair. So yeah, that was just something a bit strange. Again, didn't ruin the story for me, and maybe there was something in the Cartmel master plan they wanted to sort of integrate that with, but apart from the fact that we have to judge the story for what it is. We don't know what the Cartmel master plan ultimately was. We have to judge the text as it is. But also, even if we did know the context, like, how would they have made that work? That still seems they would have had to do a lot of work to justify something like that, because it just comes across as uncomfortable when you think about it.
I dare say a moment like this wouldn't have factored too much into the overall plan. I think it was just like an element of let's bring a bit of mystery back to the Doctor, or mystique, or
Yeah.
enigmatic quality. Oh, I know. Let's have him use that ability the Time Lords can have.
Yeah. Sure. Should we talk about the Destroyer? I mean, I know there's maybe not a lot
We
to...
can for a bit. I mean, I thought he was fun to watch at the very least, and it was cool to see the whole villains being like hesitant to work with each other for various reasons thing play out, and how Morgaine was scared of him for reasons that we didn't really get to see in effect, because he didn't really do that much.
Like, I think his place in the story is very much a spectacle-driven thing. I think I remember when I watched the story as a kid, I thought, that's like one of the best parts of the story, because he's this freaky monster and he's all melodramatic, but again, does it fit?
The presentation does a lot of the heavy lifting with that character.
And he's not even in the story for that long, and I don't know whether that's for budgetary constraints, but he basically shows up, makes a bunch of threats, breaks through his chains, and then gets shot. And again, especially given that you've already got the threat of nuclear annihilation, does he really need to be in the plot to begin with?
I mean, if he's not in the plot, then you have literally nothing for the Brigadier to do.
That is true. Man, this discussion has sort of brought out a lot of the flaws in this story that I think I was missing. In any case,
yeah, well, that's kind of the way, and I think it brings up something that we talked about a little bit at the start of last week's discussion, when we were talking about Doctor Who fans having lower standards. And I think this is not necessarily an element that is unique to Doctor Who fans, but it's something that comes up every now and then. And it's sort of the willingness to see the good in a story and then having to talk through the bad.
Yeah.
With me, it's something that has been really evident with the last few Star Wars movies that I've seen in cinema, specifically Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, because I saw those movies with a small group of people each time. I don't know if you were there for any of those specific instances, Hadley, but I remember after seeing each, we ended up having a conversation in Macca's afterwards about, oh, that was great. That was a really good movie for this reason. And then as the weeks go by and we hear about the problems, we go, oh, yeah, I guess it wasn't that great. No, I guess you're right. We were only seeing the good. And I think that is...
I only saw the Star Wars sequels with my family. I don't think we were that close yet. Maybe around Rise of Skywalker, but I don't think we're at the point where we're watching like movies together, especially Star
I don't
Wars.
think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched it with my brother, and like he got out of it. And this is a very rational man. He's probably more cynical than I am, if I'm being honest. And he was like, "Yeah, it wasn't too bad." And then I just listed everything off, and he was like, "Oh." Because the thing about Rise of Skywalker is it kind of tricks you.
Yeah.
Because the pacing is so fast, you can't process the flaws. Because there's just more flaws coming up.
Yeah, that's absolutely the issue that movie has. Well, an issue. But a lot of similar things can be said about a lot of media analysis. You know, and I think it's something I brought up last time, where it's like if you're just watching something to have fun and then put something on for entertainment and turn your brain off, I guess you're not going to notice any of the flaws. And I think that might be, I'm not going to say it definitely is, but that might be where a lot of people who enjoy the 13th Doctor era are coming from.
Perhaps. I mean, there's a lot of criticisms to be made of the 13th Doctor's era specifically, but I think one of the things that should be pointed out, especially, and I think like long-term Doctor Who fans will probably agree with me, yes, Doctor Who in a lot of ways is very silly. It's very over the top, it's weird, it's wacky. There are a lot of stuff where even if the narrative isn't objectively bad, there's stuff that seems to happen really quickly. It seems just batshit nuts. We saw this with the chase, right?
Yeah.
And in those moments, maybe you could argue the best that those stories are, not entirely, but a number of times, the best of those stories are they're innovative, they're taking risks, they're wild, which is one of the reasons I appreciate the show as much as I do. But, you know, how uncohesive a narrative a Doctor Who fan's meant to sort of accept. But the thing is, I, as a Doctor Who fan, firmly believe that it's better than some people give it credit for. I think it's better than even I've expected. Looking at even the classic series, it's like, oh, actually, these characterizations and these narratives are a lot more cohesive and a lot more enjoyable, in a way than even I remember. So I don't think, like saying, oh well, if it's just a fun sci-fi romp, whatever. I don't know if that's the most if that's the most useful attitude to take, because I think we should expect more. I think we know what Doctor Who is like at its best, and even if you aren't a fan of it, I think it's important to try and acknowledge, okay, well, yeah, there's clearly some merits here.
Yeah, and even with a story like this, like we've all had our fair share of criticisms with it. I don't think that's unfair to say.
Yeah.
But I also don't think it's unfair to say that all of us had fun with this story despite those things. And it's not just because we're ignoring them; it's because there's still a lot of good stuff in here. And I think that's the difference. Where the YouTuber JXI mentioned this towards the end of their massive 5-hour-long criticism of the Chibnall era, and that is that it's the difference between turning your brain off to have some fun and needing to turn your brain off, because otherwise the whole thing falls flat and falls apart.
So glad we got a fellow JXT watcher in the chat.
I think we've got three.
Oh, there you go. Oh,
Yeah,
the Innuendo Studios mentioned earlier, and now I got JXC. Let's go.
JXI is great. I
Yeah.
still need to finish that essay, the video essay on Doctor Who, because it's massive, but I've watched most of it, and it is very, very good.
Yeah.
It's not the only content of theirs like that. My only issue with JXC is probably a bit of a tangent. I don't like the people they associate with.
I mean, that's fair enough. They do tend to fall into that side of media analysis that can stray into the wrong reasons kind of crowd.
Do not get me started on every frame of pause. If you do, there will be no end to it.
I will not.
Every frame of pause?
What did Hadley just say? Let's
My God, this doesn't end. I'm telling you, you look it up and you see how shit it is.
Do you mean every frame of painting?
No, it's a play on that.
Oh, okay.
They're like a live stream. They pause videos and they analyze them, and I'm not going into it any further.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fair. To be fair, I don't know enough about JXI's association, so I'm not even going to comment on that. But fair enough.
Not all the people I associate with are in that same crowd, but they tend to overlap a bit.
Fair enough. I know, yeah, no, that's a really good point to bring up, Cuff. I hadn't thought about that, but
yeah. I think it brings us neatly to the end of this discussion.
Yeah, unless there's anything else anyone would like to mention.
I had one note, and I got away with it at the very start of this episode.
Okay, great.
Fair enough.
With that all in mind, I think I'm going to give this story... Oh, I don't know. It's either a 7 or a 6, and I can't decide yet.
I'm honestly... There's a part of me that's leaning between a 5 or a 6 for me, which is kind of curious.
Wow.
I think it's... I don't know whether it's because I've had a bunch of issues being pointed out to me, whether by myself or YouTube, but maybe there's just too much of them to really carry over to that 6, because I also compare this to stuff like, Leisure Hive, and especially the Happiness Patrol, which I enjoyed more. As many problems as I had with the Happiness Patrol, the narrative seemed a bit more cohesive. The world building was the biggest flaw, I think, there, but it was still more enjoyable and more ambitious in a way, with some of the, I guess, political commentary and the more serious themes. And here's the weird thing, right? Despite the fact that this story has the threat of nuclear annihilation, somehow I feel like the stakes in Happiness Patrol were higher. I'm not 100% sure why that is, but there you are.
Well, I think maybe it's because in Happiness Patrol it is more of it's not just a tighter narrative, not just in terms of its storytelling, but also just the fact that it is like zoomed in on this one specific society, and you really get to know a lot of the people within it, and you learn so much about it that it feels like by the end of that story you're like, thank God they turned this around, because like I was really to do that. Whereas with this, it's just kind of like, okay, great, it's the 80s and we're going to get blown up by nuclear war. We've seen this before.
We know what that sort of story is. And it's funny, like, I complain about the world building of Happiness Patrol, and I still think it's a problem, but maybe that's kind of the point. There's enough world building so we really empathize with these characters, because we understand how horrifying this world is and how it impacts the characters in it.
I think with that in mind, I'm going to give this a 6. I've made up my mind now.
Okay.
I'm giving it a 6.
Okay.
Sure.
Fitz, are you gonna run with the sheep, or are you gonna be a contrarian?
Give it a 10, Fitz. Give it a 10. Give it a
10. Yeah, I just, I really think you're underselling it, guys, because this is, what we call a masterpiece in criticism. So, no, I'm joking. I think... I think I'm going to give it a 5. I think there are 6s that I've enjoyed more than this. Maybe it's because, the highest highs of this story, they're good, but they're not as good as the high highs of even other stories I've given a 6. Again, the good bits of stuff like Leisure Hive and Happiness Patrol I enjoyed more than the best parts of this story, and both of those other stories, Leisure Hive and Happiness Patrol, I think they're more ambitious than this is. Certainly
that's fair.
thematically, that's the case. And I even compare
You
it
get to the
to.
5 Doctors.
Sorry,
You gave
What
the
did you
5
give to the 5 Doctors?
a 4.
You both gave 5 Doctors a 4.
Okay.
Yeah, and I even compare it to God, help me out, of series 1 story, television control, Simon Pegg. Why am I forgetting this? Help me out here, Cuff.
Long game.
Long Game. Thank you. I compare it to that, and that I think is basically on the same level as this in a way. Like, and even with the Long Game, I admire the ambitious themes in them, which again are not really present here. Don't get me wrong, the Long Game has other flaws, but when you put it all together, I do think a 5 for me is pretty fair with this story.
That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, I want to give it higher. I
no,
want
sure,
to,
yeah.
but I just can't quite do it.
Fair enough.
Mhm.
Okay, Hadley, thank you once again for joining us on another recording block. It's
Yes,
always
thank
great
you.
to get your insight.
No problem. And I'm sure it'll be a very long time before I talk on here again.
With that in mind, one last chance for the foreseeable future. What would you like to plug?
Stale Bread is back. I will, however, say, you beware, check it out. But the thing I will plug instead is my good friend Jared, who is my co-star on Stale Bread, just launched a film company called Enough from the Clowns. They have released a fake mock-up trailer that you can check out, and they're also working on a full short film about vampires.
I've read the script. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's a very excellent script, and there's some really exciting stuff coming from that company. So
For sure.
we'll get Jared on at some point. I think you're both slated for the first Neil Gaiman Doctor Who story. I think both of them actually.
Yeah, we're doing both Neil Gaiman stories. That was his idea.
Yeah.
Neat.
I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
I'm Hadley.
And
and
get off my world. Bang, bang.
Yeah. It's always funny when you hijack the outro from me because I never go into it with a plan. Can you tell? Can you tell that I don't know what I'm going to say in the outro anytime ever?
well, thank God you've got me here to save the show, Cuff.